we need to look first a little further back. A few months ago, Deacon McDaniel, yes, I got that right. Sometimes I mix him up with another person in our presbyterate, their last names. But no, Deacon McDaniel was here, and he talked with you about the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, the first document promulgated by the Second Vatican Council. The Council Fathers in that document called for a renewal of the Sacred Liturgy and asked, at the time, Pope Paul VI, if you remember, Pope John the 23rd had called the Second Ecumenical Council of the Vatican back in the early 60s, but soon afterwards he died. And so Pope Paul VI was elected, and he took on the responsibility of leading the council. And so they directed that the Pope, responding to the priorities enumerated in the Constitution of the Sacred Liturgy, renew or update the liturgical books, those books used by the priest to celebrate the Mass, and all of the sacraments, and the Liturgy of the Hours, or the Divine Office, which priests and religious pray every day by promise. And so this renewal started to happen in the mid-60s. At the very beginning in 1964, there was an instruction on the proper implementation of the Constitution, Inter Oecumenici, in 1964. That document started to set forth what types of changes the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy wanted. It was followed a little bit later, I believe I made a mistake, that should be 1965, with a motu proprio Sacra Liturgiam, which further issued more instructions for priests and bishops throughout the world to adopt certain changes in how they celebrated the Mass, or the Eucharist, the weekly Sunday celebration of the Catholic faithful. In 1967, there was the second instruction on the proper implementation of the Constitution and the liturgy, Tres Habeq Annos, in 1967. And then finally, in 1970, there was Liturgicae, I always cannot pronounce that word correctly, these are all Latin. All of these Latin words come from the first letters, the first words of the Latin documents as written by the Pope, and then sent to the Universal Church, where they're translated in different languages. The effect of these documents, the 1964 through 1967 instructions and motu proprios, the effect of these documents made immediate changes upon the Church's life. What do I mean by that? This is called a 1965 transitional missal. It is generally the same as the missal that was in use before the Second Vatican Council. It's primarily in Latin, and it has all the same prayers that have been used since the 1500s. And so what these instructions started doing in 1964, excuse my voice as it goes up and down, that's not normal, it's this thing I have. If you look closely, and I'm going to walk up here, I'll use my outside voice, you'll see that there are lines through some of the words and some of the red instructions for the priest. Someone has taken a pen and simply drawn lines through them. This is the result of those instructions that were given in 1964, 1965, 1967. And so the liturgical changes that the Sacred Constitution on the Liturgy, the Second Vatican Council called for, were put into place immediately. They didn't wait to publish a new book. They sent out instructions, and immediately certain changes were being made. And so priests were taking their pens, usually with a ruler, so they could do it very carefully, and they were crossing out those sections, those words, those instructions that were no longer to be done. Later on, this is more for just completing the history of these instructions than where we're at in the presentation, so excuse me for that. In 1994, there was the fourth instruction on the proper implementation of the liturgy, of the Constitution of the Liturgy. And then in 2001, the fifth, and as of right now, the current last instruction, which had to do with the language and the translation of the liturgy into multiple languages. It was called Liturgicam Authenticam, and it was promulgated by St. Pope John Paul II in 2001. This document, Liturgicam Authenticam, might be in the memory or the current history of some of you. It's what caused the retranslation of all of our liturgical books. Not in Latin, so the Latin stayed the same, but it caused a new English translation to come into effect. And so some of you remember in 2011, in Advent of 2011, we had to start using "and with your spirit" instead of "and also with you." There was also a few other changes in the language that we use in English as a result of this instruction, Liturgicam Authenticam.